Welcome to this Autodesk University class. My name is Lee Mullin, and today I'll be talking to you about taking ownership of construction for capital project owners. As such, I'm assuming that this question is relevant to all of you, which is, are you really getting what you want from these projects? So as building owners, infrastructure owners, asset owners, you pay vast sums for these projects, whether it be new builds, upgrades, or even just maintenance. And there can be very complex projects which are managed by teams that often you trust, but sometimes you don't. So in an industry where there's 30% waste, late and overrunning projects are the norm, you are often paying directly or indirectly for mistakes out in the field, and you don't always get the end results that you're looking for. You don't always get them at the price you're looking for. What we are now seeing, though, is we're seeing an evolution from clients in how you want to work with your supply chains and how you want to manage these projects. So with the introduction of international standards like ISO 19650, we're seeing that the power is being handed back to owners to get better outcomes and have more control of the process. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I've been lucky in my past to work with a whole range of industries and a whole range of different owners and clients. And there's a lot of similarities between different owner types. But there's also a lot of differences. So take, for example, infrastructure owners such as a DOT. They tend to lean more towards delivery of a maintainable asset, and they're happy to incentivize and encourage things like joint ventures as a way to do that. So they can introduce and incentivize more collaboration in the process. Airports, for example, they tend to be kind of almost a rolling construction site of constant upgrades and new builds and conversions of spaces such as retail on an almost weekly, monthly basis. So they have to better manage the data that they're working with so they can reach a goal of almost this live digital construction site alongside the real world site, because that helps them better manage and predict what's happening in these fairly active areas. Whereas a commercial building owner might be looking at how they can efficiently deliver that project with an eye on how they can maximize their floor space, or how they can potentially let or sell those office spaces early, off plan, through use of things like BIM and visualization tools to get ready for potentially even the sale of their whole development once the project has been completed. Then in retail, needs can massively vary. So for some, it's all about speedy delivery. It's all about delivery at all costs to make sure that a new store is open as quickly as possible and people can start making money from it. But we can also find that there's retail clients that are looking at standardized frameworks. So they've got consistent ways of delivering repeatable, modularized parts that all look the same to maintain your brand. So the emphasis on quality and easy handover is even more important, particularly if you're handing over to things like store managers who aren't building and building system experts. Then we're also seeing big growth in areas such as the largest technology companies who are looking at building new factories and data centers, and they're wanting to better manage the entire process from initial concept right through to handover and then having the building in use. So for them, it's incredibly important to have better use of data within that built environment. So they're looking at increased visibility. They want more transparency in what's happening. So they're looking to incentivize collaboration with a whole number of means. They're looking at improving their commissioning processes so they can get up and going from day one when they get the keys. As I mentioned at the start, my name is Lee Mullin. I joined Autodesk in 2007 from the acquisition of a small company called Navisworks, based in Sheffield in the UK. When I started in that role, in the first week, I was working with a large major airport. I was working with oil and gas owners. I was working with museums, and they were all looking at how they could better understand and manage data. And since then, I've been able to work with lots of these on advising and helping manage their processes and how they can develop them. So today I want to ask you again, what is it you're looking for from a project? What makes your project successful? So for some people, we find that it's about just simply being operational on day one. The second that they get the keys, they can start working with their new project. For some, it's just about reducing risk, making sure there's no surprises. For others, it's about delivery on budget that's pre-agreed, and that's part of no surprises. For others, it's paradoxically actually about value for money. They're happy to spend that bit more. They're happy for surprises to come along, as long as they're getting value for money. And for others, it's about that handover experience, whether it be just simply a reduction of paper through to having a much more complex digital asset management system, which links directly into their facilities management. For others, it's about how they can reduce costs in CapEx phase, in capital expenditure phase. For others, it can be about how they can reduce their costs operationally later on. And you'll find that a lot of these are contradictory. You'll find that if you want that sustainable asset, sometimes you can be paying more for it, but then you can also find benefits later on with your operational expenditures. For some, it's about resale value. For some, it's about just how they work day to day with their new build. But the one thing which I've found every client is looking for is they're just looking for certainty. They're just looking for knowing that they are going to get what they asked for at the start of a project. So let's go back to why, as an owner in this industry, you don't tend to run these projects yourselves. Now, most capital project owners tend to run small and lean teams. They don't tend to have lots and lots of people in-house. I know there's exceptions out there, but typically you tend to be a small team that's a point of contact for your architects, your engineers, your contractors, or whoever you deem as your project managers on the team. Simply, most teams in-house don't have the resources, the skills, the expertise, or potentially even the tools to be able to run these projects. And that can be a fairly simple project, such as a maintenance upgrade or a small upgrade to a building, but they can also be incredibly complex. I've seen teams of hundreds of people working for the development, for example, of an airport, but often they're contracted out from other firms. I've seen large trades teams that typically take on maintenance tasks, being asked to lead renovation projects, but they've called in other firms to help them manage or bring in additional trades to fill their expertise gaps. So why is it that clients don't want to get their hands dirty and manage construction themselves? Well, simply put, it's risk. Whether that be the health and safety risks of managing hundreds of people on site, or the financial risks of an unexpected find under the ground, or fluctuating material prices that we're seeing a lot at the moment, or simply the risk of managing so many spinning plates where only one needs to fall and it can spell disaster for a whole project. And these spinning plates have very real effects on projects. As an industry, there's long been discussion around poor productivity on projects, and we'll discuss this in more depth later. But just as a headline figure, over a third of time that's spent on site is wasted on non-optimal activities. So there's definite improvements we can make on the construction site. There's also huge amounts of money wasted on rework, over 280 billion it's estimated, each and every year. Now, this is a figure that you are paying for directly or indirectly for work that has been done, put in the wrong place, and has to be taken down and started again. So these are figures that everyone is trying to drive down. And finally, we're finding that a lot of the data that's being collected on site isn't being reused. In fact, over 95% of it is wasted once it's been collected. So all these efficiencies and areas of waste are something that, as a client, you don't really want within your projects. If you need and want your projects to be more aligned to the business outcomes that you have, you need to encourage your supply chains to move away from processes that cause these challenges, and move them towards something that is, yes, still highly collaborative, but reduces fragmentation in the industry. Now, let's talk a little bit more about that industry fragmentation and how that affects your construction outcomes. So a typical construction project can be made up of multiple teams across all phases of the project lifecycle. And we can find that they're using different systems, different platforms. In fact, 25% of construction companies use 5 or more different software applications. So that can make integration and communication harder and limits how you can reuse that project data. In fact, we actually find that over 70% of the global construction industry is still using a traditional paper-based process. But even where that's not being used, we've got a mix of emails, phone calls, messages on your mobile phones. In fact, what we often find is because of the lack of trust that's happening within construction companies is the lowest common denominator of data can be shared between people. So rather than sharing a rich 3D model, which has all the information that the next team can use, often we're finding that teams are sharing PDFs or Excel spreadsheets with outputs of that data because they're wanting to protect themselves. So that's added additional complexity with how you communicate and how teams that were working for you communicating. So what can happen if you think about your last 3 projects is each project can feel different. You find yourself with different teams, different recommendations, different handover deliverables. So on one project, you might have that paper-based system alongside a laser scan. On the next one, you might end up with a whole range of 2D deliverables, Excel spreadsheets. On your next project, you might end up with what you see as, the perfect BIM deliverable with databases. But what that means is you've then got this lack of integrity of the data that you receive. You haven't necessarily got consistent checks that are happening on each of those projects. And it also means that you end up with this environment where you're responsible for aggregating this data. And as we know, like about 80% of the cost of the building comes from once it's been completed. There's similar figures apply for infrastructure projects as well. But you can end up with this environment where you've got completely different deliverables that you've somehow got to get consistency from. So typically we're seeing owners tend to be kept at arm's length during the course of a project. They'll have periodic check-ins with their design or construction or project management team. This is where the issues are often raised. Sometimes these can be big decisions or announcements of things that we can't change, and the things that have been worked on potentially for weeks or months in advance. That means you don't necessarily get the visibility or the transparency of that decision. And often that can limit what options you've got, which allows you to change course or make an alternate decision that actually works better for you long term. So what we're recommending is that you increase your visibility on these projects. So doing more check-ins and having a better understanding of what's going on the project, any issues that might impact your costs, your schedules, or even the end products that's delivered that you're going to need to manage. So what we're not saying is having lots more meetings. I think we're pretty fed up with video meetings by now. But what we're recommending is that you have more informal check-ins. And this can be just by improving your visibility, by regaining control. So in the last decade, we've seen big changes in this area, which mean you as a capital project owner can regain control of parts of the project that previously you didn't get access to, that you've relied on other teams to do for you in the past. So whether it's gaining better visibility on how the project is running, seeing issues before they become RFIs, before they become change orders, or simply being more involved in the management of the deliverables that you're going to use to run the asset after the project, or simply specifying how the project should be run in a consistent way that you know works, and providing incentives through your procurement process to enable that better collaboration. And that's one of the things we've seen that's really changed the way in which people work. Things like integrated project delivery, which is really incentivizing people to work differently. So let's have a little look at one of the things that we've been doing at Autodesk, which is really to try and help bring those teams together to improve the way in which teams work. So the biggest challenge that we see as far as fragmentation of the industry is just simply getting people to be on the same page, to work in the same place. So by bringing teams together initially, we can enable better collaboration from a single source of truth, a single place where all the project documentation is. So whether you're in the office or the job site, whether you're in design or construction, you're working from the same set of information. So you've got that consistency. So once we've brought together all these people into a single source of truth, into the same place using a common data environment, they're then able to start using that information in a more effective way whether they be design teams working on the same model, whether they be planners working out the takeoffs that are available on the designs, the models and the drawings, whether they be coordinating or even just doing checks out in the field and doing the project management. Having all the information in the same place is allowing people to be more collaborative and to reduce those challenges that we talked about earlier, such as rework and wasted time out on site. So what does that mean for you? Well, firstly, it means in the capital planning phase, you can get better insights over how your current portfolio is working, so you can make future decisions. Secondly, it allows you better visibility into issues, into RFIs, into change orders, to really understand where the risks are on a project and how you can mitigate them. And finally, it allows you to run better assets, with either more sustainably or more efficiently, or whatever you need for how you run your projects. And obviously the cycle goes round and round as projects develop, as maintenance is needed. But most importantly, it's about understanding what your objectives are, what the outcomes that you're trying to drive are. And one of the pieces of work that we've been doing at Autodesk over the last couple of years is trying to understand for different industries, what are the business outcomes that you're linking your technology to. So firstly, let's kind of talk about portfolio performance. Most people want to understand kind of what objectives are they trying to deliver on their current portfolio. How can they maximize what they're doing with what's already there? Then we've got outcomes that are based on capital project development. Now, this can often be based on what's gone wrong on the previous project, but often there's metrics which people are trying to drive because they're trying to either save money or deliver faster, and there's outcomes associated with those. Operational efficiency once you've got those projects delivered. So how can you make sure that you're always improving and optimizing what's available within your current spaces? And finally, and definitely not least, those social, environmental, and economic factors that are affecting your projects. So what are you doing for sustainability? How are you using the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN to drive your business? So what we'd like to see is, how are you using these outcomes? Are you using them today? Are these things that you're driving towards for the future? Are there any which we've missed? We'll come back to that a little bit later, but for now, let's talk a little bit more about Autodesk Construction Cloud and how we're seeing it help people. As best-in-class technology, it has a platform which allows you to work from design, plan, build, through to operations. And it allows you to share data across phases with a single common data environment, which reduces some of those communication barriers we talked about earlier and helps people make better decisions. We analyze the data that's in there to help you identify issues and prioritize which ones are the most important to reduce risk to your projects. And then you can grow Autodesk Construction Cloud with our wide range of partners that help you grow Autodesk Construction Cloud in the way that helps you meet your objectives, your outcomes. This is connected construction. So let's talk about and match up some of those outcomes we talked about earlier with the technologies that might help you deliver them. So the first outcome I'd like to talk about is, how can you increase your stakeholder engagement? Well, firstly, it's important that everybody's on that single source of information. So a common data environment allows you to easily share information between different project stakeholders and communicate on it easily. We have dashboards and project views that allow everybody to set up the view that they need for their problems, their challenges that they're working on each day. It means you can set up your own dashboards as well. We've got cross-project issues, which means that no longer are you stuck in a silo where all your design issues are stuck in one place and your construction issues in another. We can now start seeing the history of an issue for the whole project. And finally, we've got 2D workflows as well as BIM workflows. So it doesn't matter what kind of project you've got, what the end result is, we can work with both. Next, you might want to improve your supply chain management. Now, supply chains can be difficult. Often we've got filofaxes full of our suppliers that we've worked with for many years, but actually, do you want to improve who you're working with? Do you want to make sure you've got the best people on the job? Do you want to diversify who you're working with? Well, we've got a builders network that allows you to manage bids, to be able to invite more people to tender. We've got over 1 million builders in the US that are using our Building Connected platform. We've also got the ability to start leveling bids as well. So you can start identifying any areas where there may be some unexpected changes. You can start comparing apples to pears in a much more simple manner. And finally, we can actually start doing qualifications on your general contractors to make sure that you've got the best contractor for the job that you're working on. It's also important to increase your cost predictability. This is one of the areas that causes most of the clients I know the most pain, because that's where they're really seeing the challenges. They don't know what money's coming out and when. So by using Autodesk Construction Cloud's tools, we can start linking our schedule to our cost items. So we can start identifying what money's coming in, when it's coming in. We can also then start linking that entire history of issues which we previously shared to RFIs, which then lead to change orders, which means you've then got within your change order the full history of an issue. You can see where it originated, how potentially it could be solved, or why it hasn't been and why it's come to your desk as something which you're going to need to sign off on. Talking about signing off, we can also set up custom approval workflows, which means you can more easily manage how the information is shared on your projects. We can auto-generate documents. We also have tools to help you with progress tracking, so you can better identify where your project is up to at any one time. And finally, let's talk about how you can improve your handover experiences. This is something which I think I've seen over and over, where the handover deliverables are difficult to use. You don't necessarily get everything that you want. Well, we've got tools that help you with the commissioning process for asset management, which obviously won't be yourselves, but it will be the teams that you work with. So you can better specify what you're going to receive. We also got submittal management, so you can, again, better collect all that documentation in the right place. We can then do as-built exports to make sure that, again, you've got that right information with that full history of issues and markups that have been left on there. And we also have, and you'll hear more about this at Autodesk University, a digital twin platform. And you'll hear a lot more about that in some of the other sessions, and I'll also leave some links on that in the handout sessions. Let's talk about some of the customers which have been using Autodesk Construction Cloud and how it's been helping them. First, we've got Chick-fil-A, obviously a well-known fast food retailer. For them, it's all about transparency and efficiency. It's about improving visibility of what's happening on their projects. As a retailer, it's important they've got consistency. So they need to be able to see how they're working with all their different builders and their different trades in lots of different regions of the country. Then we've got Prologis, and for them, it's about consistency. It's about knowing one project to the next, what to expect from their supply chains. And that's what Prologis are doing with their various projects. And finally, let's talk about Shopify. Now, for Shopify, they're concentrating on those handover deliverables. They're making sure that they've got all the information they need so they can be up and running with their projects. So I'd like to finish up just with some conversations that I have often with customers that are really going to help you with your technology strategies. So firstly, don't concentrate just on the technology. Concentrate on the people. So do the analysis of your people, understand what their needs are, understand what their technology level is, and where their entry levels are on these technologies. We don't want to give complex technologies to people that just aren't going to receive them. Make sure you've got adequate resources. Now, that doesn't mean you need to employ 20 people overnight, but just make sure that for what you're trying to do, you've got enough people in-house. And if not, maybe that's the time to start building a business case to help you deliver these projects more effectively. Make sure you have a program in place for education, for upskilling. Work with our partners, work with others to make sure that everybody understands what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. And finally, and this one cannot be discounted at all, incentivize the people you work with, your contractors, your subcontractors, your design teams. We've found over and over that integrated project delivery as a procurement method is improving the way in which people work, it's reducing risks, and it's reducing the amount of problems that people have on projects. So have a look at areas where you can incentivize your teams to deliver better for you. Look at the processes you're working on. Now, process is incredibly important, and often that's the thing which, as a risk management, you pass on to another team. But what can you do as a capital project owner to improve those processes? Now, we see lots of areas for improvement, such as standardization. So every team knows how to work with you, and you know what every team should be providing you back. That's one of the best ways in which you can improve the way you work, knowing that project A, project B, and project C should all be run the same. Improve the visibility of the projects that you're on. Make sure that you know what's going on. You don't necessarily need access to everything, but you can definitely get access to more of the dashboards and understanding of what's happening on a project at any one time. The next one's quite important as well, quality assurance. So it's one thing putting standards in place, it's another thing making sure they're being used. And there's another Autodesk University class, which I'd highly recommend, either watching live or watching on replay afterwards, from Denver International Airport, which talks about automated model checking and what you can do to make sure that the standards that you've set out are being delivered by your partners. And finally, education. There's no point having processes in place if people don't know what they are or why they're important. So make sure you put education in place for all of them. So we've talked about people, we've talked about process. Now, finally, let's talk about technology. Technology is that important third hub. Without the other two, it falls down. But technology is also very important. It's a catalyst. It allows you to do things today that you couldn't do 10 years ago. So it's important that you look at a platform. Encouraging siloed software tools will improve those silos, but it won't improve and reduce risk for the whole project. It won't reduce certainty for the whole project. So have a look at a platform as a way of delivering your projects. Have a look at metrics. What metrics can you get from the system? What's going to help you deliver the outcomes you need? How are you going to be able to identify your key performance indicators, your KPIs from these technologies? Have a look at the entry barrier of these softwares as well for the people that are going to need it. So if you've got fairly low technology skilled employees, you don't want a technology platform that's going to have quite a high entry barrier. So how can you easily allow people to get into these technologies? And finally, control. How can you improve permissions and who gets access to what information at what time? This is one where I recommend you look at the ISO 19650 standard. This standard was introduced to help owners to manage their projects better and to make sure that the delivery teams are delivering what they want when they want it. So improving control, improving who gets access to what and when is incredibly important for these projects. So to finish off, let's talk a little bit more just around how you can improve your projects. Now, not every team is able to be actively involved. Sometimes if you've only got a team of 2 or 3 people, it's going to be very difficult to change how your projects work overnight. But you can make quite big differences with small changes. So if you can only have that passive involvement, have a look at maybe specifying a compatible technology stack, something you can easily get access to, something that you know that your design teams, your planning teams, your building teams, and your operations teams can all work with and access. Have a look at a common data environment. We've had electronic document management for years, but a common data environment helps you add that control. It helps you make sure that the data is shared to the right people at the right time. Have a look at dashboards, making sure that you can see the latest of what's happening on a project. So you can have those more regular check-ins without having to have a meeting. You can see where there's a spike of issues. You can see where things have been resolved. You can understand the budgets and the forecasts. Have a look at creating common standards. Now, it's not unusual to have common standards. We've often had things like CAD standards and BIM standards as ways of delivering parts of the project. But what common standards can you put in place for your whole project? And then if you have got those standards in place, how are you going to check against them? Again, I'd recommend the Denver International Airport class about automated model checking. It's a really interesting panel from a number of our customers who are looking at this kind of area about how they can improve their quality assurance. And finally, and this is obviously where you are a lot more actively involved, actually having more of those in-house teams. Now, this could be as simple as just developing the design, doing more coordination, doing more of your own takeoffs to make sure that the materials that are being ordered are the same as you would expect. But it can also just be a lot more doing your own QA, doing more checks out on site, and all those things which capital project owners historically haven't always had the resources to do. But if you can, I would recommend it's worth looking at. So our final question, and this is my call to action to you, which is to have a think about, what does your project need? What does your company need? What are the most important outcomes for your team? So I've got a forms survey here. I'm going to put that in the chat window, in the Q&A window, so all of you can access it. And it's also going to be in the handout documents as well. But I'd ask you to have a look at which of these outcomes are most important to your organization. And I would really like to hear from you as well if you think we've missed something, because we don't always get it right. So I just want to understand what's important to your organization and why. Please feel free to share that information. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of Autodesk University and have a look at the resources for more information about how Autodesk Construction Cloud can help you and more about outcomes and how that might help you as well.